The sun dipped behind the crystalline towers of Virelia's capital, casting long, sharp shadows across the alien palace. Its walls glimmered with an unnatural light, reflecting the pride and ambition of the civilization within. In the grand throne room, the air hummed with the soft pulse of alien energy fields, resonating faintly with the heartbeat of the city itself. The room was filled with dignitaries, advisors, and guests from distant worlds, but the queen's attention rested on one figure who barely moved, barely cared about the pomp around her daughter, Princess Lyria. Lyria had never been like other Virelians. While her peers excelled in strategy, diplomacy, or physical prowess, she drifted through life as though the world itself held no meaning. She would wander the palace gardens, sketching abstract patterns in the air with her fingers, or spend hours examining the reflections of light on the crystalline floors. She was clever in her way, but it was subtle, quiet, and entirely useless in the eyes of her mother, the alien queen. To the queen, Lyria's seeming inability to excel at anything practical was a failure, and in Virelia, failure was something no one could afford. "Mother," Lyria said softly, her voice barely rising above the murmur of conversation. She held a small, delicate flower that no one else could recognize. "Why do we have to impress these humans again? I thought diplomacy was a matter of paper and promises." The queen's eyes, sharp and bright, narrowed slightly. "Because, my daughter, humans are clever, yes, but they are unpredictable. We cannot afford to underestimate them, and neither can you." Her tone was measured, almost cold, but beneath it was a sharp edge of frustration. "I wish you could understand the importance of appearances, Lyria. Not everything in life can be ignored or treated as a curiosity." Lyria tilted her head and looked at her mother with a faint, questioning smile. "Perhaps," she said, "but some curiosities are more interesting than importance." The queen pinched the bridge of her nose and exhaled a sound that could have been mistaken for impatience or sorrow. Lyria had a way of saying things that made the queen doubt herself, a quiet rebellion that did not speak but simply existed. It was maddening. The reception that evening was a swirl of colors, ideas, and languages. Humans had come, as expected, to observe and negotiate with Virelia, a planet renowned for its advanced technologies and unyielding political pride. The human ambassador, Captain Adrian Hale, moved through the crowd with a calm confidence. He was not tall or imposing by Virelian standards, and his features carried the simplicity of a species unaccustomed to alien grandeur. Yet there was something about him that drew attention, not fear, not awe, but curiosity. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of quiet determination. The queen noticed him immediately. Humans were interesting, unpredictable, and yet surprisingly resourceful. Adrian did not bow too deeply, did not overflatter, but he listened, observed, and offered insight. And then something unexpected happened. The queen felt a spark, a possibility. She approached him, her steps graceful and deliberate, her long cloak brushing the polished floors. Lyria followed behind, her expression unreadable, as though she had no particular interest in the encounter. "Captain Hale," the queen said, her voice smooth and commanding, "I have observed your species with some curiosity. Your people possess resilience, resourcefulness. Traits that are rare, even in my experience." She studied him for a moment, her eyes calculating. "I am intrigued by one particular possibility. Perhaps you can help me teach my daughter something she sorely lacks." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Teach her?" His tone was cautious, not disrespectful, but aware that alien conversations often carried hidden consequences. "Yes," the queen said, her voice low and firm. "My daughter, Princess Lyria, is considered lacking in certain practical skills. Diplomacy, politics, strategy, she fails at them all or she avoids them. I believe you could provide her with perspective, a human perspective." Her gaze shifted toward Lyria, who simply shrugged, as if the world's complexities were not her concern. Adrian's curiosity piqued. He had expected negotiation, discussion, perhaps an exchange of technology or knowledge. He had not expected this. "You want me to teach your daughter?" he asked. The queen smiled, but it was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who had already made a decision and expected it to be followed. "More than that," she said, "I want you to marry her." There was a pause. A ripple of silence ran through the surrounding dignitaries, who had begun to overhear fragments of the conversation. The words seemed almost impossible, absurd even. Adrian stared at the Queen, unsure whether this was a test, an insult, or some form of diplomacy beyond his comprehension. Lyria, meanwhile, blinked slowly, her expression still neutral. "Marry her?" Lyria echoed, her voice small but clear. "You mean like a marriage?" The Queen inclined her head. "Yes, a marriage. You will provide her with structure, perspective, and an understanding of usefulness that she has never had. You will guide her in ways that she cannot manage alone. And in return, you will secure a bridge between our worlds. A bridge that begins with understanding, not conquest." Adrian swallowed. He began, but found himself searching for the right words. He had faced challenges before, but this was unlike anything. To marry an alien princess, to become part of a society so advanced and so different, was daunting beyond measure. Yet something in the Queen's tone suggested it was not a request. It was a command, and Virean commands were rarely given lightly. Lyria, for her part, merely tilted her head, watching him carefully. "I don't mind," she said simply, almost to herself, "if it helps you understand or me." The Queen blinked. That was all it took. Lyria's quiet acceptance, her lack of resistance, stirred a strange mixture of triumph and disbelief in the Queen. She had controlled the situation without a fight. Perhaps the daughter was not completely useless after all. She had mastered the art of passive acquiescence. "You understand the responsibility," the Queen said sharply, turning back to Adrian. "This is not merely symbolic. This is a choice that will bind you, her, and our worlds together. You must guide her, challenge her, and ensure she grows into the person she is meant to become." Adrian nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "I will do my best," he said, though the full meaning of the commitment was only beginning to form in his mind. The Queen stepped back, her eyes scanning the assembly. "Then it is settled. The marriage will take place within the month. Prepare yourselves, for this is the first step in a journey that will redefine our understanding of usefulness, wisdom, and strength." The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Lyria. She wandered the palace corridors, her mind buzzing with vague curiosity. She examined the alien architecture, the glowing panels embedded in walls, the delicate lattices of energy that pulsed along the floors. Adrian's presence lingered in her thoughts, not with fascination or fear, but with a quiet acknowledgement that humans could be different, perhaps interesting in ways she had never considered. Adrian, too, found his mind restless. He walked alone through the gardens, trying to understand what he had agreed to. The alien plants were unfamiliar, their colors impossible for a human eye to fully capture, yet he felt a strange sense of calm among them. He was to marry a princess who seemed indifferent to the very things her society valued, yet somehow, that indifference was itself a kind of power, a challenge that demanded respect. Back in her private chambers, the Queen sat alone, contemplating the future. She had made the decision in a flash of strategic impulse, believing she could control the outcome. And yet, a small, nagging thought whispered in her mind. What if she had underestimated humans or her daughter or both? She shook the thought away. For now, she had set the pieces in motion. That would be enough. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. Lyria learned the basics of ceremonial protocol, while Adrian studied Virean customs and language. Both approached the task with quiet determination, neither fully aware of how much the other would influence their lives. The palace watched with anticipation, some in awe, some in disbelief, but all curious about this unusual pairing. When the day of the ceremony arrived, the grand hall was filled with lights and guests from multiple worlds. Lyria stood beside Adrian, her expression serene, almost indifferent, while he offered a small, respectful bow. The Queen observed them from her throne, her heart a mixture of pride, apprehension, and a faint, unexpected curiosity about what would unfold in the years to come. And in that moment, as the vows were exchanged and the alliance solidified, no one, least of all the Queen, could predict the subtle but profound ways this human would shape the life of her useless daughter, or how Lyria would quietly grow into someone far more remarkable than anyone in the galaxy could have imagined. The ceremony concluded with light and color, a dazzling display of alien technology and human simplicity blending together. Guests applauded, diplomats whispered, and somewhere in the crowd, a few humans and aliens alike exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that something extraordinary was beginning. Lyria looked at Adrian then, and for the first time in her life, felt a flicker of curiosity she could not easily dismiss. Adrian returned her gaze, calm, respectful, and patient, as though he understood something important about her that even she had yet to discover. The queen, watching them, felt a strange twist of emotion. Pride, perhaps, relief, maybe. But there was something else, something she could not name, a sense that the future was no longer entirely hers to control. And for the first time in many cycles, the thought was exciting. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, piercing layers of clouds that reflected the afternoon sun. Lyria pressed her hand against the cool glass, staring down at the green and blue world below. For the first time, the princess felt a mix of excitement and uncertainty, emotions that her mother had never allowed her to indulge in. Violia had been all sharp edges and bright lights, all schedules and duties. Earth with its soft oceans, trees swaying in the wind, and people walking freely without ceremony or protocol, felt strange. Adrian guided her gently through the shuttle cabin, speaking quietly in a human tongue. "You'll like it here," he said. His voice was calm, confident, and somehow reassuring. "It's messy, but alive. Things don't always run perfectly, and people make mistakes, but that's where the beauty lies, you'll see." Lyria looked at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "Messy," she echoed. On Violia, the idea of imperfection was almost offensive. Structures were precise, behavior was controlled, even emotions were regulated. "Messy can be dangerous," she said softly. Adrian smiled faintly. "Sometimes, yes, but danger isn't always bad. It teaches you. It helps you grow." She considered his words, feeling a strange curiosity stirring. It was not excitement. It was something quieter, deeper, an interest in understanding a world that did not obey rules the way hers had. When they arrived in the city, the differences became even more pronounced. The humans bustled about, laughing, shouting, carrying things from one place to another. The streets smelled of food, metal, and rain, a mixture of smells that Lyria found confusing but oddly fascinating. Humans were messy, yes, but they were alive in a way that no Violian could understand from a palace observation window. Adrian led her through a small apartment he had prepared for them, modest by Violian standards but warm and welcoming. There were books stacked in corners, small machines whirring quietly, and windows that let the sunlight spill across the floor. Lyria ran her fingers along the wooden table, touching imperfections that she would have found repulsive on Violia. Here, they seemed comforting. "You'll need to adapt," Adrian said, unpacking a few simple items. "Your skills from Violia won't all translate here, but your mind, that will help. You're smart, Lyria, smarter than you think." Lyria looked at him, uncertain whether to be flattered or annoyed. She had never considered herself smart. She had been called useless her entire life. But Adrian said it without judgment, without expectation, just fact. That was new. The first days were awkward. Lyria struggled with human customs. How to eat, how to greet neighbors, even how to walk through a crowded market without drawing strange stares. Adrian guided her patiently, explaining things that seemed obvious to humans, but foreign to someone raised in a palace of perfection. Lyria watched people laugh at mistakes, shrug off minor accidents, and continue on with life. She noticed how humans solved problems creatively, using tools and ideas that seemed illogical but worked. One afternoon, they visited a city park. Children ran, dogs barked, and the wind carried the scent of flowers. Lyria sat on a bench, observing quietly. She noticed a small girl trying to fix a kite tangled in a tree. Instead of panicking or asking an adult to do it perfectly, the child used tape, string, and a branch to create a solution that was messy but effective. "That's clever," Lyria murmured, almost to herself. Adrian glanced at her, his expression amused. "Humans don't need perfection to succeed. Sometimes the imperfection is what makes the solution better. It's adaptive, flexible, resilient." Lyria thought about that word, resilient. She had never heard it used outside the palace's cold logic, but it fit. Humans adapted, even when everything seemed against them. They were not strong in the physical, predictable ways her mother prized, but they survived, and they thrived through thought, creativity, and cooperation. As weeks passed, Lyria began to change, quietly and subtly. She learned to cook simple meals, to navigate streets, to understand the flow of human conversation. She still struggled with the chaos, still longed for the structured predictability of Violia, but she found herself intrigued by how humans approached life differently. Adrian noticed the change, of course, though he did not comment too loudly. He had seen it before in other humans, how exposure to challenge could awaken hidden potential. But with Lyria, it was different. She had intelligence, but it had been unused, suppressed by her mother's expectations and her own lack of confidence. Earth offered her freedom, and in that freedom she began to grow. One evening, Lyria sat at the window of their apartment, watching city lights shimmer across the water. Adrian joined her, leaning against the frame. "You've changed," he said softly, almost cautiously. "I can see it in how you move, how you think. You notice things now that you used to ignore. You ask questions instead of avoiding them." Lyria looked at him, unsure how to respond. "I am learning," she admitted quietly. "It is strange. This world, it is nothing like Violia, but it teaches things Violia cannot." Adrian nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Exactly. You are learning resilience, creativity, and patience, all things your mother valued but never understood that you could have in your own way. That's what humans do. They survive not by being perfect, but by adapting." Lyria felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet approval that she had never experienced from anyone else. Humans, and Adrian in particular, offered her something the palace never could: belief in potential, in possibility, in self. Months passed, and the Queen occasionally sent messages. Lyria received them silently, reading the cold assessments and critiques with a detached patience. The Queen demanded reports of progress, wanting to see if her daughter was becoming useful by Violian standards. Lyria often replied with short, factual updates, careful not to provoke or contradict, yet quietly defying her mother by growing in ways she did not anticipate. One day, an alien envoy arrived in Earth City to assess Lyria's development. Lyria welcomed them politely, Adrian at her side, demonstrating her increasing comfort with human hospitality. The envoy observed quietly, expecting a flustered, unprepared princess. What they found instead was a young woman who moved through the world with thought and grace, who listened, adapted, and responded with subtle intelligence. The envoy reported back to the Queen. "Princess Lyria shows growth," the message read. "She demonstrates adaptability. While not conforming to traditional Violian definitions of usefulness, she has acquired skills that are unexpected." The Queen's eyes narrowed as she read. Unexpected was a dangerous word in Violia. It implied loss of control, the rise of factors she could not predict. She had married her daughter to a human, believing she would teach Lyria to conform, to fit into the rigid definitions of usefulness. Instead, the daughter had grown independently, guided by human ingenuity and quiet mentorship. The Queen felt a flicker of doubt, a prick of unease she had never before experienced. Back on Earth, life settled into a rhythm. Lyria explored libraries, discovering human history, art, and science. She marveled at the human ability to solve problems with limited resources, to improvise when circumstances changed, to collaborate in ways that required trust rather than fear. Adrian encouraged her curiosity, never demanding perfection, never questioning her choices unless they endangered her well-being. One afternoon, Lyria found herself in a human laboratory, watching as a team of engineers repaired a failing energy unit. Humans worked together with a mix of trial and error, discussion and intuition. Lyria noted their strategies, their improvisations, and their calm persistence in the face of repeated setbacks. She realized that humans succeeded not because they were flawless, but because they persisted, adapted, and learned from mistakes. Adrian caught her staring. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Lyria smiled faintly. "I am thinking humans are strange. They fail constantly, yet they survive. They invent solutions that seem impossible, and somehow they succeed. It is not strength, it is something else." "Something else," Adrian prompted. "Ingenuity," she said, "and patience and persistence and perhaps empathy. All things Violians believe are weaknesses, yet humans use them as power." Adrian laughed quietly. "You've noticed. That's why I thought you'd like it here." The seasons changed. Lyria's understanding of humans deepened. She began to speak more confidently, express opinions, and even solve small problems on her own. She realized that the useless label her mother had placed on her was not truth, it was expectation. And she did not need to conform to anyone else's definition of usefulness to find her own. The Queen, watching from afar, began to grow uneasy. Reports arrived more frequently now, not just assessments but subtle praise from envoys, human officials, and even Adrian's peers. Lyria's independence, her quiet intelligence, and her ability to adapt were evident. The daughter the Queen had called useless was thriving, not in the way Virelia defined success, but in ways that no one could have predicted. For the first time, the queen felt a pang of uncertainty. She had believed the marriage would control, guide, and mold her daughter. Instead, she had created a situation where Lyria could grow beyond the narrow definitions of her world, influenced by a human who did not seek to dominate, but to teach through example. And on Earth, in a small apartment filled with sunlight, laughter, and the hum of human activity, Lyria looked at Adrian and realized something she had never thought possible. She was learning to live, to think, to grow, not as a princess of Virelia, but as herself. The Queen's message came again that evening, cold and formal. Update on your progress is required. Describe your contributions to human-alien understanding. Lyria read it silently and then set the device aside. She turned to Adrian. I am contributing, she said softly. In ways she cannot measure, in ways she cannot understand. Adrian nodded, a faint smile on his face. Then let her underestimate you, that is your advantage. Lyria considered his words. Perhaps this was the true lesson of Earth. Not obedience, not perfection, not protocol, but understanding, adaptation, and quiet strength. Perhaps her mother's mistake was in thinking that usefulness could only be defined by control. And as the sun set over the city, painting the streets with gold and shadow, Lyria felt a flicker of something new. Freedom, potential, and the strange, quiet power of being underestimated. It was the beginning of a journey she had never imagined, and the first step in proving that humans and her own unique mind were forces to be reckoned with. Without lifting a weapon, without following rules she had never wanted to follow, and without the need for anyone's approval but her own. The Queen's starship pierced the atmosphere of Earth with silent elegance, its sleek hull reflecting the sunlight like liquid metal. Inside, she watched the familiar blue and green planet with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Reports had reached her over the cycles. Her daughter was thriving in ways that no Virelian protocol could measure, guided by a human who seemed far more capable than anyone had imagined. The Queen had to see it for herself. Adrian met her at the landing platform, bowing respectfully, though with a small, confident smile. Lyria stood nearby, composed, dressed in clothing that was human, comfortable, and practical. She had changed. The quiet, uncertain girl who had stepped onto Earth months ago had grown into someone poised, alert, and thoughtful. Mother, Lyria said, her voice calm, you are here. The Queen's gaze swept over her daughter, assessing her as she would any asset or tool. But the usual judgment faltered. Lyria did not fumble, she did not look confused, she did not rely on Adrian. She was fully present, engaged with her environment, confident in ways that were not superficial or performative. Your progress is unexpected, the Queen said carefully, her tone measured. Explain yourself. Lyria inclined her head politely. I have learned, Mother, I have observed humans, listened to Adrian, and found value in ways Virelia does not measure. I am contributing to understanding between our worlds. The Queen's eyes narrowed. The words were diplomatic, precise, and yet impossible to dismiss. Lyria's growth was clear, undeniable, and unsettling. The useless daughter she had married off to a human had developed an independence that no one could have predicted. The Queen followed them into the city, her presence drawing attention from humans who had never seen such visitors. She noted how effortlessly Lyria moved among the people, how her curiosity guided her rather than rigid expectation. The princess asked questions, engaged with street vendors, observed engineers working on power systems, and offered insights that were subtle but accurate. The Queen watched Adrian closely. He did not lead Lyria, he did not control her, he simply walked beside her, guiding with gentle advice, offering perspectives rather than commands. He was not strong in the Virelian sense. He could not dominate, intimidate, or enforce compliance. But he was powerful in ways the Queen had never respected, through patience, empathy, and intelligence. They visited a public workshop where humans were repairing a transportation system damaged by storms. Machines hissed and sparks flew as engineers improvised solutions using limited tools and materials. Lyria knelt beside a young engineer, examining a wiring diagram, suggesting a simple modification that would improve efficiency. The Queen watched in astonishment. This was her daughter, useless according to Virelian judgment, taking part in problem-solving with calm, clear insight. The human engineers looked to her as an equal, and she responded with respect and practicality. No one had to push her. She was active, engaged, and effective. Adrian leaned slightly toward the Queen. "Observe how humans operate," he said quietly. "They adapt to circumstances rather than forcing perfection. They use their creativity and their mistakes as tools. That is why they succeed." The Queen's eyes remained fixed on Lyria. She realized now that her definitions of usefulness were narrow. Strength was not just physical, intelligence was not just calculation, and leadership was not just command. Humans demonstrated power through flexibility, empathy, and cleverness. Lyria, by embracing this, had grown into someone truly formidable. As the day progressed, they attended a human council meeting, a gathering of officials addressing interspecies collaboration. The Queen expected to see Adrian speaking for Lyria, guiding her responses. Instead, Lyria contributed her observations directly, offering insights into both Virelian and human perspectives. She highlighted potential miscommunications, suggested compromises, and even proposed long-term strategies that combined Virelian technology with human creativity. The Queen felt a strange twist of pride and unease. Her daughter's capability was undeniable, and yet it had developed independently of her influence. Adrian had guided her subtly, encouraged her growth, but had never imposed it. He was not teaching in the Virelian way, he was nurturing. During a quiet moment, the Queen spoke with Adrian privately. "You have changed her," she said. "Do you understand what you have done?" Adrian shook his head slightly, smiling. "I did not change her, she changed herself. I simply gave her space to see possibilities, to learn in her own way. She is remarkable because she chooses to be, not because I taught her." The Queen frowned, thinking, that was the problem. Virelia valued control, predictability, and measurable results. She had attempted to control Lyria, to impose usefulness, but Adrian had allowed her to grow freely, and the result was beyond anything the Queen had imagined. That evening, they walked along a quiet riverside, the city lights reflecting in the water. Lyria skipped stones across the surface, watching the ripples spread outward. The Queen observed, her mind racing. This small, quiet activity, this simple observation of cause and effect, encapsulated what she had failed to understand. Growth could not be forced. Understanding came from experience, experimentation, and reflection. Lyria glanced at her mother. "You worry about usefulness," she said softly. "But usefulness is not one shape, one method. It changes with context, with perspective. Humans, Adrian, even we find usefulness in ways you cannot predict." The Queen's lips pressed together. The words were unsettling, yet they resonated with truth. She had underestimated not only humans, but her daughter's ability to adapt and thrive. Lyria was no longer the girl who wandered Virelian corridors without purpose. She was a thinker, a problem solver, a bridge between worlds. And the Queen had played no part in this transformation beyond arranging the initial conditions. In the following days, the Queen continued her observations. Lyria and Adrian collaborated on projects that involved both human and Virelian participants. They solved logistical issues with creativity and patience, balanced cultural misunderstandings, and proposed solutions that impressed both species. The Queen noted the efficiency of their methods, the calm reasoning in times of uncertainty, and the respect they commanded from humans without force, fear, or intimidation. One morning, during a visit to a technological innovation hub, a crisis arose. A malfunction in the energy grid threatened to disrupt an entire sector of the city. Human engineers panicked, unsure how to stabilize the system quickly. Adrian assessed the situation calmly, coordinating teams with suggestions that relied on both human improvisation and Lyria's precise understanding of Virelian systems. The Queen watched in stunned silence as the problem was solved not by brute force or strict protocol, but by observation, reasoning, and collaboration. Lyria's quiet suggestions, combined with Adrian's insight, stabilized the grid efficiently. The humans cheered, the Virelian envoys took notes, and the Queen realized, finally, the lesson she had failed to see. Intelligence and capability are not only measured by the standards of one's own culture. That night, the Queen confronted her feelings. For the first time, she admitted a private truth. Her daughter was no longer useless. She had grown in ways the Queen could not predict, guided by a human perspective that valued flexibility, empathy, and ingenuity over rigid expectations. Adrian had been the catalyst, yes, but the growth had come from Lyria's own curiosity and determination. Lyria sensed the change in the queen. During dinner, the usually formal and distant monarch softened slightly, asking questions about their projects, their methods, and even human customs. Lyria answered carefully, aware of the subtle shift. She had learned patience, diplomacy, and observation. She had learned to read people and adapt her approach without betraying her own identity. Adrian noticed the queen's subtle shift, too. He had seen rulers change slowly through experience, but this was different. The queen's pride, long a barrier, was yielding to recognition of humans, of Lyria, and of the value of perspectives beyond Virelian control. The following day, they visited a community school where humans and Virelians collaborated on educational projects. Lyria led workshops, guiding students in understanding both human and Virelian methods of problem-solving. She encouraged them to experiment, to ask questions, to explore solutions in ways that were unconventional yet effective. The queen observed quietly, noting the reactions of both species. Humans admired Lyria's guidance and kindness. Virelians noted her clarity and insight. She realized that her daughter had become a bridge, a conduit for understanding, not by force or obedience, but by intellect, empathy, and adaptability. Late that evening, alone in her quarters, the queen reflected on the past cycles. She had believed that arranging a marriage with a human would teach Lyria usefulness. She had underestimated the subtle power of human perspective and the quiet strength of curiosity and empathy. Her daughter had thrived in freedom, guided not by Virelian expectations, but by the values humans demonstrated daily: resilience, creativity, cooperation, and moral reasoning. The queen's pride, once so rigid, softened. She realized that true strength did not always resemble power, precision, or control. Sometimes, strength was quiet, adaptable, and unseen until revealed through action and understanding. She had thought she was shaping Lyria, but in truth, Lyria was shaping the world around her, and teaching her mother a lesson no Virelian protocol ever could. In a final observation before retiring for the cycle, the queen watched Lyria and Adrian working together to design a new communication system between human and Virelian sectors. They collaborated seamlessly, each respecting the other's perspective, combining ingenuity and precision, flexibility and structure. Lyria's ideas flowed naturally, her confidence evident, and Adrian guided subtly, never dominating, always encouraging. The queen felt something she had not expected: humility, and alongside it, awe. Her daughter, once dismissed as useless, had become remarkable, not in spite of humans, but because of them, because of the subtle, quiet power of empathy, reasoning, and adaptability. For the first time, the queen considered the possibility that she had misjudged not only Lyria, but her own understanding of value. Perhaps usefulness was not a fixed standard. Perhaps it could be found in unexpected places, nurtured in unexpected ways. And perhaps in the human spirit, there lay a type of strength Virelia had never known. As she watched them, working side by side, the queen realized the journey was far from over. Lessons would continue, understanding would deepen, and the bridges between worlds would grow stronger. And she, the once proud and inflexible ruler, had only begun to understand the quiet, enduring power of humanity, and the daughter she had once underestimated. The first light of dawn spilled across Earth's city, painting the streets with soft gold. Lyria stood at the balcony of their apartment, breathing in the crisp morning air, her mind alert and focused. Today, her mother, the queen, would join them for an important interstellar summit. It was a rare event, humans and Virelians working side by side to discuss collaboration, trade, and exploration. The stakes were high, and the queen's presence meant scrutiny at its highest level. Adrian appeared behind her, carrying a tray of breakfast. He placed it on the balcony table with a gentle smile. "Are you ready?" he asked. His tone was calm but carried quiet confidence, the same confidence that had guided Lyria through months of adaptation and growth. Lyria glanced at him, her eyes reflecting determination. "As ready as I'll ever be. Mother has to see the truth today. She will understand, or at least begin to." The queen arrived aboard her starship just as the summit commenced. Her presence was commanding, her posture flawless, and her expression unreadable. She stepped into the conference hall, scanning the room filled with humans, Virelian envoys, and representatives of other species. Every eye turned toward her, recognizing authority, intelligence, and power. Yet the queen's attention went directly to her daughter. Lyria met her mother's gaze calmly, her posture confident, her expression composed. The queen noted immediately that the child she had once dismissed as useless now radiated competence and authority. She had grown in ways impossible to ignore, guided subtly by the human beside her and the experiences she had accumulated over months of living on Earth. The summit began with discussions of trade, resource management, and cultural exchange. Early on, a challenge emerged. A misalignment in the planetary communication grid threatened to delay the conference, a critical issue that required immediate resolution. Panic rippled among the human engineers, while some Virelian delegates suggested rigid, hierarchical interventions that would slow the process. Adrian assessed the situation first. He moved among the humans, asking precise questions, observing the equipment, and noting their workflow. Lyria followed, calmly analyzing both human and Virelian approaches. She suggested modifications to existing systems, combining Virelian technology with human adaptability. The queen watched silently. She had seen intelligence, resilience, and ingenuity in her daughter before, but now it was evident in action, effective, calm, and collaborative. Lyria moved with purpose, issuing guidance with clarity, encouraging the humans without overriding them, using insight rather than authority. Minutes later, the system was stabilized. Communication lines were restored. The humans and Virelians exchanged amazed glances. The queen felt a sharp twist in her chest, a combination of pride and something else, regret. She had underestimated her daughter. She had underestimated humans, and now she had witnessed firsthand what her useless daughter could achieve. After the technical issue was resolved, the summit continued. Lyria presented proposals for joint initiatives between Earth and Virelia. She explained how human flexibility could complement Virelian precision, how empathy and collaboration could improve decision-making, and how curiosity could drive innovation beyond protocol. Her words were measured, her logic impeccable, yet her tone carried warmth and approachability. The queen leaned forward slightly. She noticed delegates nodding in agreement, humans impressed by Lyria's insight, Virelians reluctant but acknowledging the effectiveness of her ideas. The daughter she had dismissed had become a bridge, an ambassador, a leader, and a symbol of cooperation. During a break, the queen approached Lyria privately. Her steps were measured, her voice steady but carrying uncharacteristic softness. "You have exceeded every expectation," she admitted. "You have grown in ways I never imagined. I underestimated you." Lyria inclined her head politely. "Perhaps, mother, because you measured growth only by Virelian standards. I have learned from humans that usefulness is not one shape, one form. It changes with perspective, with context. I have grown in ways you may not yet recognize, but they are real." The queen felt a strange humility. For the first time, she acknowledged that rigid standards could blind a ruler to true potential. Her daughter's intelligence, curiosity, and empathy had created solutions, inspired cooperation, and bridged cultural gaps that the queen herself could not have achieved alone. Adrian joined them quietly, standing beside Lyria with a supportive smile. The queen's gaze shifted to him. "You guided her?" she asked. Adrian shook his head. "I did not guide her, she guided herself. I only offered perspective when asked and sometimes a suggestion. Her growth is hers alone." The queen's mind reeled. She had intended to teach, to shape, to control. Instead, she had watched someone else, humanity itself, through Adrian, help her daughter discover her own power. The realization stung, but it also inspired a new understanding. As the summit reconvened, a more complex challenge arose. Representatives from another species proposed a joint venture that risked cultural misunderstanding and technological conflict. Many delegates were hesitant, fearing failure. Lyria stepped forward. She analyzed the proposal, considered each species, strengths and weaknesses, and suggested a framework that allowed for experimentation, feedback, and mutual learning. Adrian supported her subtly, facilitating communication, and ensuring the human perspective was considered without overshadowing Lyria's leadership. The other delegates followed her guidance, surprised by her clear insight and collaborative approach. The project was approved unanimously, with enthusiasm from both humans and Virelians. The queen observed the scene, feeling an emotion she had long denied herself. Awe. She had seen competence before, but this was different. This was not born of protocol, power, or rigid rules. This was born of empathy, observation, and the quiet confidence to act thoughtfully. Her daughter, guided by human principles and her own curiosity, had accomplished something the Queen herself could not have engineered. Later, in a private chamber, the Queen spoke with Lyria and Adrian together. "I must admit," she said, her tone softer than usual, "I have been wrong. I believed marriage would make you useful, that humans could only serve as tools for guidance. But I see now that usefulness is not imposed, it is discovered, and you both of you have discovered it in ways I could never have imagined." Lyria inclined her head, grateful for the acknowledgement but careful not to show triumph. "Thank you, Mother. Perhaps it is not too late to understand that growth and value can take many forms." Adrian smiled faintly. "Sometimes the strongest lessons come from being underestimated." The Queen allowed herself a small smile. She had underestimated humans. She had underestimated her daughter, but now she had learned, and she would not make that mistake again. She realized that humility, observation, and respect were as powerful as any Virelian technology or protocol. The summit concluded successfully. Agreements were signed, projects were approved, and a new era of collaboration began. Lyria and Adrian had demonstrated that intelligence and leadership were not measured by dominance or control, but by understanding, empathy, and adaptability. The Queen recognized that her daughter's subtle power, shaped by human perspective, was remarkable. That evening, the three of them stood on the balcony of the summit building, overlooking the city illuminated by lights and reflections. Humans moved below with purpose and chaos intertwined, their mistakes and successes blending into a rhythm that was unpredictable but effective. Lyria looked at her mother, then at Adrian. "It is beautiful," Lyria said softly. "Life is not perfect, but it is alive. And in that life we find strength." The Queen nodded. "I see it now. I see that strength is not always measured by what we control, but by what we understand. I have judged too narrowly. I regret that I did not see it sooner." Adrian spoke gently. "Regret is a lesson, too. It shows that we can grow, even in understanding our own mistakes." The Queen smiled, genuinely this time, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had learned the most important lesson of all: power and usefulness were not fixed. They could be nurtured, discovered, and grown through experience, empathy, and insight. Her daughter had taught her this, guided by a human perspective that had once seemed so alien. In the following weeks, Lyria and Adrian continued their work bridging human and Virelian societies. The Queen remained present, observing, learning, and gradually stepping back to allow her daughter to lead. Each day she was reminded of the quiet, enduring power of humanity, the ability to adapt, to solve problems creatively, and to inspire trust and cooperation without force. Lyria flourished in this environment. She was no longer the hesitant, uncertain girl who had arrived on Earth months ago. She had become a leader, a problem solver, and a symbol of collaboration. She had learned the value of patience, the power of empathy, and the importance of perspective. And she had done it without abandoning her own identity, blending Virelian insight with human ingenuity. The Queen, for her part, found a new perspective on her own role. She could lead, command, and rule, but she could also learn, observe, and grow. She saw now that pride could blind even the most capable ruler, and that humility and understanding were strengths in their own right. One evening, as the sun set and the city glimmered below, the three of them stood together in silence. The Queen placed a hand on Lyria's shoulder. "I see now," she said softly. "I am proud of you, not for obedience, not for conformity, but for who you are and what you have achieved. You have shown me that strength comes in many forms." Lyria smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Thank you, Mother, and thank you, Adrian, for helping me discover it." Adrian inclined his head modestly. "The discovery was yours, Lyria. I only walked beside you." The Queen exhaled, finally at peace. The daughter she had once dismissed as useless had become remarkable, not in spite of humans, but because she had embraced their lessons while remaining herself. She had bridged worlds, demonstrated intelligence and empathy, and shown that usefulness was not a rigid standard but a living, evolving measure of capability and heart. As the night deepened, the Queen realized that her journey was also far from over. She would continue to learn, to adapt, and to see the value and perspectives she had once dismissed. Humanity had taught her this lesson, and through Lyria she had seen it embodied. The pride she once clung to had softened into understanding, and the future, uncertain, vibrant, and full of possibility, stretched before them. And in that future, Lyria and Adrian would continue to thrive, to guide, and to show the galaxy that strength, intelligence, and usefulness were not bound by rules, species, or expectation. They were defined by heart, mind, and action, and in that truth lay the quiet, enduring power of humanity. The Queen smiled one last time as she looked at her daughter and the human who had changed everything. For the first time, she understood completely. She had been wrong, and that mistake had created something extraordinary, something she could not control, could not predict, but would never regret.